"Keep your eyes down when you pass that room," Gerald Whitmore said sharply. "And whatever you do, do not look at her face." The warning was delivered without emotion, the way a man might caution a guest about a broken stair or a dangerous animal kept out of sight. The Whitmore Ranch lay just outside Casper, Wyoming, wealthy enough to command respect, orderly enough to suggest virtue. Cattle grazed on rolling land. The house stood white and proud against the open sky. From the outside, it looked like the picture of frontier success. Inside, however, something was hidden. Her name was Constance Whitmore, and for 10 years she had lived behind closed curtains at the back of the house, a woman erased while still breathing. At 28, she was already spoken of as if her life were finished. 280 pounds from years of confinement and quiet despair. Her body large, her presence inconvenient. But it was her face that condemned her. A fire had torn through the house when she was 18. Everyone else escaped with smoke in their lungs and stories to tell. Constance was pulled from the flames last. The right side of her face had never healed properly. Skin drawn tight and uneven, one eye clouded, her mouth forever pulled downward by scar tissue. Children cried when they saw her. Adults looked away too quickly, embarrassed by their own revulsion. So her father hid her. "She's alive," Gerald would say if asked. "That's all that matters." What he meant was, "She is an inconvenience. I survived." That afternoon, guests filled the parlor, laughter, crystal glasses, the rustle of dresses. Constance sat alone upstairs, fingers resting on the page of a book she could barely focus on, listening to life continue without her. "Mr. Blackwood and his son are here," her stepmother Loretta called through the door. "Do not come downstairs." Constance did not answer. She never did. Down below, Garrett Blackwood listened with polite disinterest as marriage terms were discussed for Gerald's younger, prettier daughter. He was a mountain man by reputation, broad-shouldered, scarred by weather and work, a man who spoke little and noticed everything. His son, James, did not share his restraint. Bored, restless, 15 and careless, James wandered the upper hallway and stopped in front of a closed door with drawn curtains. He knocked once, then pushed it open. "What are you hiding up here?" he asked. Constance turned instinctively, heart stuttering. Too late. He saw her face. The boy froze, his mouth opened, shock turning to something uglier. "Oh, God," he whispered, "what happened to you?" The sound of boots thundered up the stairs. "James!" Gerald barked. "Get away from that room!" Garrett arrived just in time to see his son staring, horrified, at the woman trying to hide herself behind a shawl. The room went quiet. "That," Gerald said stiffly, stepping in front of Constance as though blocking a stain, "is my eldest daughter. She was in an accident. We keep her secluded, for everyone's comfort." Constance lowered her eyes. She had heard these words before. She had lived inside them for a decade. Garrett said nothing. He simply looked, not quickly, not with pity, not with disgust. He looked long enough to see the scars, and long enough to see past them. "Come," he said finally to his son, his voice calm. "We're leaving." Later that night, when the house had settled and Constance believed the day's humiliation was over, there came a knock at her door. She opened it, expecting scolding. Instead, Garrett Blackwood stood alone in the hall. "I was told not to look at your face," he said quietly. She braced herself. "I looked anyway." He met her gaze without flinching, "and I think the wrong thing has been hidden." The world often hides what makes it uncomfortable. not because it is weak, but because it is afraid of what it might learn if it looked closer. By morning, the Whitmore ranch was already buzzing with quiet satisfaction. Gerald Whitmore drank his coffee with the air of a man who had solved a long-standing problem without lifting a finger. Loretta supervised the servants with renewed energy, her voice lighter than it had been in years. The engagement negotiations downstairs had gone well, and more importantly, the embarrassment upstairs had remained where it belonged. Or so they thought. Constance sat at her small writing desk staring at the pale light creeping through the edges of the curtains. She had not slept. Garrett Blackwood's visit the night before replayed in her mind, again and again, not his words, but the way he had looked at her, not away, not through her, at her. It unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. A knock sounded at her door. This time it was not timid nor apologetic. "Constance," Gerald said, "you're coming downstairs." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "Why?" "Mr. Blackwood is leaving. He wishes to speak with you. Briefly." Loretta's voice followed, sharp and irritated. "Cover your face properly." Constance wrapped her shawl tighter, the familiar armor of fabric, and lowered eyes. Each step down the stairs felt like walking toward judgment. The parlor was full. Servants, family, James Blackwood standing stiffly near the door, clearly wishing himself anywhere else, and Garrett Blackwood, upright and immovable, hat in his hands. The room quieted when Constance entered. Whispers flickered like sparks. "There she is? Good Lord! Why would he want to see her?" Constance kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago that humiliation hurt less when anticipated. "Miss Whitmore," Garrett said. The sound of his voice cut through the murmurs, calm, even respectful. She stopped a few feet away. "Yes, sir." Gerald cleared his throat loudly. "This won't take long. My daughter is unwell. She's not accustomed to visitors." Garrett ignored him. "I came to make you an offer," he said. The room stilled. Loretta laughed softly. "An offer?" "Yes." Garrett turned slightly, ensuring everyone could hear. "I intend to marry Miss Constance Whitmore." Silence fell like a dropped plate. Then laughter, not polite laughter, not nervous laughter, real laughter, sharp, disbelieving, cruel. Cubby stared at his father. "Pa, you can't be serious," Loretta said. "Mr. Blackwood, surely this is some sort of misunderstanding." Gerald's face flushed red. "My daughter is not suitable for marriage. She's damaged." The word landed hard. Constance felt it like a slap, but she did not move. Garrett did. "She is suitable," he said, "and she's standing right here. Speak to her, not about her." No one was used to that. Gerald sputtered. "She's overweight, disfigured. She has no prospects, no dowry worth mentioning." "She has intelligence," Garrett replied, "education, discipline, and more resilience than anyone in this room." A few servants shifted uncomfortably. They knew. They had always known. Loretta scoffed. "You can do better." Garrett nodded once. "I'm sure you believe that." James finally spoke, his voice tight. "Pa, everyone will laugh." Garrett looked at his son steadily. "Then let them." He turned back to Constance. "I won't insult you by pretending this is romance," he said. "It isn't. I need a wife, a partner, someone capable of running a household, keeping accounts, and standing firm in hard country. I don't need beauty, I need strength." He paused. "And I don't need permission." The room erupted. "This is madness." "He's desperate." She'll ruin him. Poor man doesn't know what he's getting. Constance felt heat rise in her chest, not shame this time, but something sharper. "You're wrong," she said. The room went silent again, shocked that she had spoken. She lifted her head. For the first time in years, she did not hide her face. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone turned away. Someone else stared too long. "My father says I am damaged," Constance continued, her voice steady despite the pounding in her ears. "But damage is not the same as worthlessness. You hid me because you were ashamed, not because I was incapable." Gerald's mouth opened. No sound came out. "I accept Mr. Blackwood's proposal," she said, "not because I have no other choice, but because I choose not to rot in a house that treats me like a secret." James swallowed hard. Garrett extended his hand. Constance took it. They left the parlor amid stunned silence. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Constance breathed deeply, as if for the first time. "You didn't have to humiliate them," she said quietly. "They humiliated you for 10 years, Garrett replied. "I simply refuse to participate." She hesitated. "You understand what people will say about you." "I do." "And you don't care?" "I care about building a life that works," he said, "not about impressing people who measure worth by faces." They rode away that afternoon. From the wagon, Constance watched the Whitmore ranch shrink into the distance. No one waved goodbye. Her past did not follow her. The road ahead climbed into mountains she had only seen in books and sketches. Snow clung to distant peaks. Pines darkened the horizon. James sat stiffly across from her, refusing to meet her eyes. She did not force him. That night they camped near a river. Garrett handed her a blanket, thick, heavy, warm, and turned away without comment, giving her space without making a show of it. She wrapped herself in it, staring into the fire. For the first time since the fire that scarred her skin, something else warmed her. Possibility. They laughed because the world teaches us to mock what does not fit in its narrow mold. But sometimes the loudest laughter is nothing more than fear. Fear that someone has seen value where others refuse to look. The road narrowed as they climbed. The wide, forgiving earth of the lowlands gave way to stone, pine, and elevation that made the air thinner and sharper with every mile. The wagon creaked beneath its load, wheels biting into frozen ruts left by earlier travelers who had passed through quickly, never intending to stay. Constance sat wrapped in the blanket Garrett had given her, the wool heavy and rough against her skin. It smelled faintly of smoke and leather, of a life lived outdoors, practical and unsentimental. She had not thanked him yet. Gratitude felt dangerous. It felt like hope. James rode silently across from her, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes flicked toward her face when he thought she wasn't looking, then away just as quickly. Not cruelty this time. Something closer to confusion. Garrett drove without speaking, his focus fixed on the path ahead. He did not fill the silence. He did not ask her how she felt or whether she regretted her choice. He behaved as if her presence were already settled, already accepted. That, more than anything, unsettled her. They camped the first night beneath towering pines. Snow dusted the ground in thin sheets, crunching underfoot as Garrett moved with practiced efficiency, unloading supplies, setting the fire, securing the horses. Constance watched, unsure where she fit in this new arrangement. "You can sit by the fire," Garrett said without looking up. "Or help. Either's fine." Not should, not must, just fine. She chose to help. Her hands were clumsy at first, stiff from cold and unfamiliar work, but Garrett showed her how to stack wood so it would catch easily, how to keep the fire breathing without smothering it. He corrected without scolding, demonstrated without touching. James lingered nearby, pretending to inspect the horses. That night, when the wind howled through the trees and the cold crept into her bones, Constance lay awake, wrapped in the blanket, staring up at the dark. The sounds of the wilderness pressed in, alive, watchful, immense. She had never been so exposed, and yet she did not feel unsafe. The second day brought snow, not the gentle kind that softened the world, but sharp flakes driven sideways by mountain wind. The path became treacherous. Garrett slowed the wagon, reins firm in his hands. When the cold became too much, he stopped without being asked and pulled a heavier coat from the supplies. "For you," he said, handing it to Constance. She hesitated. "What about you?" "I've got layers." He turned away before she could argue. She pulled the coat on, warmth seeping in slowly. Her throat tightened, and she forced herself to look out at the trees rather than let tears fall where they might be seen. They crossed a narrow pass that afternoon. Below them, the land fell away into a deep valley, white and blue and endless. Constance caught her breath. "I've never seen anything like this," she said. Garrett glanced at her. "It's unforgiving, but honest." She nodded, understanding more than he knew. That night, James finally spoke. "You really don't care," he said suddenly, staring into the fire. Garrett looked at him. "About what?" "About how she looks." Constance stiffened, bracing herself. Garrett answered without hesitation. "No." James frowned. "But people stare. They stare because they're small," Garrett said, "and because staring costs them nothing." James kicked at the dirt. "It scared me." "I know," Garrett said. "Fear isn't a sin. What you do with it matters." James fell quiet again, but something in his posture shifted, less rigid, less defensive. On the third day, the weather cleared. Sunlight spilled over the mountains, turning snow into diamonds. The ranch appeared suddenly tucked into a wide basin like a secret kept by the land itself. A solid log cabin, corrals, smoke rising from a chimney. Constance's heart stuttered. "This is it," Garrett said. The cabin was smaller than the Whitmore house, but it felt grounded, real. Inside, the air was cool and clean, wooden furniture worn smooth by use, no excess, no waste. "This will be your room," Garrett said, opening a door down the hall. "You'll have privacy." She stepped inside. A simple bed, a small window overlooking the trees, a table by the wall. It was more space than she had ever been given that was truly hers. Dinner that night was quiet. Garrett served her first without comment. James noticed, said nothing. Afterward, Garrett split the remaining chores evenly. He did not assign her work like a servant. He worked alongside her. Later, as the fire burned low, Constance found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "You don't look at me the way other men do." Garrett poked at the fire. "How do they look at you?" "Like a problem," she said, "or a lesson, or something to endure." He considered that. "I look at you like someone who survived," he said finally. "I respect survivors." The words settled over her slowly like snow on still ground. That night she slept deeply. In the days that followed, patterns formed. Garrett rose early. James handled the horses. Constance learned the rhythms of the cabin, how to manage supplies, how to keep the fire steady, how to make the space warmer, softer, more human. Garrett noticed everything she changed. He said nothing, but when she hung curtains, he fixed the rod more securely. When she reorganized the shelves, he brought in more storage. When she cooked her first meal, he ate quietly, then went back for seconds. Small acknowledgments, solid ones. One evening, as they sat by the fire, snow falling gently outside, Constance realized something with a start. She was no longer waiting for the moment this kindness would be revoked. She was beginning to believe it might last. Trust is not built in grand declarations. It is built on cold roads, shared shimwants, and the quiet gift of a warm coat when no one is watching. The cabin taught Constance its rules slowly: fire before dawn, water hauled before the cold stiffened the ground, bread mixed by feel, not measurement, silence that was not emptiness, but space, room to exist without apology. At first, she moved carefully, as if one wrong step might remind everyone that she did not belong. Old habits clung to her, turning her face away, making herself smaller, apologizing before speaking. The cabin did not respond to those instincts. It required presence, hands, attention. Garrett never corrected her posture or her manners. He corrected actions: how to stack wood so it dried properly, how to seal a draft with cloth and resin, how to read the weather in the way birds settled on branches. Instruction was brief, practical, without judgment. He built her a separate sleeping space without announcing it, simply moved a finished bed frame into the spare room one afternoon and said, "You'll sleep better here." She did. James watched all of this with guarded curiosity. He was still distant, still sharp-edged, but the cruelty had drained out of him, leaving something raw and uncertain behind. He tested boundaries in small ways: late mornings, half-done chores, pointed silences. Constance met him calmly each time. "Finish your sums before supper," she said one evening, sliding a slate toward him. "You're not my teacher." She met his eyes, did not flinch. "No, I'm the one making sure you don't grow into a man who fears what he doesn't understand." He stared at her, then bent over the slate. Garrett overheard nothing. He did not need to. As weeks passed, the cabin changed. Curtains softened the windows. Shelves held labeled jars instead of scattered tins. A quilt appeared on the chair by the fire, sewn from salvaged cloth Constance had found packed away and forgotten. The place grew warmer, not just in temperature, but in spirit. Garrett noticed in the way he lingered by the doorway before leaving each morning, in the way he set aside a book he'd never touched before and asked, "What's this one about?" She told him. He listened. At night they sat across from each other by firelight, not touching, not avoiding, simply sharing the quiet. One evening, as snow piled high against the door, Garrett spoke without looking up. "You don't hide any more." Constance's hands stilled in her sewing. "I'm tired of it." "You don't owe anyone courage," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I owe myself honesty." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. Another day, Garrett brought home a broken stool. "Can you fix this?" She examined it, tools in hand, and nodded, "Yes." When she finished, he tested it with his full weight. "It holds," he said. "So do I," she replied softly. The first touch came by accident. A bowl slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. Garrett moved instinctively to help, their fingers brushing as they reached for the same shard. Constance froze. He did not pull away. He did not linger either. "Careful," he said gently. But that night, as she lay awake, the memory of that brief contact burned warmer than the fire ever could. Winter deepened. Work bound them together in quiet cooperation. Garrett began to rely on her judgment, asked her opinion on supplies, on schedules, on plans for spring expansion. "You think long-term," he said once. "That's rare." "I learned by being forced to," she answered. "When you're trapped, planning is the only freedom you have." He absorbed that without comment. James slowly thawed. One afternoon, a neighboring rancher visited. His eyes widened when he saw Constance. "Well," the man muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Didn't expect—" James stepped forward before Garrett could. "She's my stepmother," he said sharply, "and you'll speak to her with respect or not at all." The rancher flushed, muttered an apology, and left early. James said nothing afterward. Neither did Constance. But that night, when she placed an extra portion of stew on his plate, he did not protest. Another storm trapped them indoors for 3 days. With nowhere to go, words found space to grow. Garrett spoke of his late wife, briefly, without sentimentality, of a woman unsuited to the mountains, who had withered in silence until illness claimed her. "She wasn't weak," he said. "She just needed a world I didn't know how to give her." Constance listened without jealousy, without fear. "I'm not her," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's why this works." The closeness changed after that, not rushed, not claimed, chosen. One night, as wind rattled the windows and the fire burned low, Garrett reached for her hand deliberately. "Tell me if you don't want this," he said. She turned her palm upward and laced her fingers through his. "I do." He kissed her scarred cheek first, then her mouth, slow, reverent, as if learning a language long denied. She did not cry. She did not hide. For the first time since the fire, she felt whole, not repaired, not corrected, but accepted exactly as she was. Their intimacy grew quietly, naturally, without demands or comparisons. Garrett touched her scars as if they were part of a map that led him home. "You're strong," he told her once, forehead resting against hers. "So are you," she answered. "You just learned it later." Spring came. Snow retreated. The land softened. Constance's body changed with the work. Stronger legs, steadier breath. The scale mattered less than the way she moved through the world now, unafraid. She walked into town beside Garrett without lowering her eyes. People stared. She let them. Inside the cabin, light spilled across the floor, warm and steady. It no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a beginning. God. Healing does not arrive all at once. It settles in quietly, in shared meals, steady hands, and the realization that safety can exist without perfection. Spring did not arrive quietly. It came with mud and meltwater, with swollen rivers that chewed at their banks, with men riding in from town carrying news they pretended was casual, but never was. Prosperity always brought attention. Attention always brought trouble. Constance sensed the shift before Garrett named it. It began with looks in town that lingered longer than before. Not just curiosity now, but calculation. Whispers sharpened. A woman at the mercantile stopped mid-sentence when Constance entered. A man laughed too loudly and said her name like it was a joke he expected others to finish. "She's gotten bold," someone muttered once, "walking around like she belongs." Garrett heard it. He said nothing. At home, however, he became quieter, more watchful. He checked the rifle twice before setting it by the door. He rode the perimeter at dusk instead of dawn. One evening, Constance asked, "What's coming?" Garrett didn't answer right away. He added another log to the fire, watched the sparks lift and vanish. "My name carries weight in this territory," he said finally. "Not all of it welcome." James looked up from his book. "Because of the railroad?" Garrett nodded. Years earlier, a rail company had tried to force a route through the mountain basin. Garrett had refused to sell. When surveyors trespassed anyway, he'd driven them off, legally, violently, and publicly enough that the railroad never forgot the insult. "They're patient," Garrett said. "They don't forget land that beats them." Constance absorbed this quietly. Then she asked the harder question. "And me?" Garrett met her eyes. "Your leverage." The word landed heavily between them. She did not flinch. "From whom?" "Your father." The warmth in the room seemed to dim. "He's been asking questions," Garrett continued, "in town, about the ranch, about our marriage, about you." Constance felt an old ache stir, familiar and unwelcome. "He gave me away without hesitation." "Yes," Garrett said, "and now that you're visible, now that you're no longer hidden, he wants control back." When Hintz slammed his book shut. "He doesn't get it." "No," Garrett agreed, "but he will try." The first letter arrived a week later. Formal, polite, poisonous. It questioned the legality of the marriage, suggested that Constance's condition might have impaired her consent, expressed concern for any future children she might bear. Constance read it once, then again. Then she folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "He's trying to erase me," she said. "He can't," Garrett replied. "He already did once." Silence. That night, Constance could not sleep. She rose quietly and retrieved a leather portfolio she'd carried from the Whitmore house without ever opening. It had been hidden beneath old blankets, forgotten by everyone but her. Inside were documents, deeds, maps, letters, her mother's handwriting. Her mother had not died in the fire. She had died months later, of an illness worsened by neglect. And before she did, she had left Constance something Gerald never knew about. Land, a strip of mountain property bordering the basin, rich with water access, perfect for rail passage. Gerald had assumed it destroyed in the fire. It was not. Constance stared at the papers, heart pounding. The truth rose with terrifying clarity. This was never about her face or her weight or her mind. This was about land. The next day, Garrett returned from town grim-faced. "They're spreading rumors," he said, "that I tricked you, that I bought a damaged woman to secure property rights." Constance swallowed. "They're not wrong about one thing." She showed him the portfolio. Garrett read in ignorance. When he looked up, his expression had changed, not with anger, but with something close to awe. "You never told me." "I didn't know if it mattered," she said. "I didn't know if I mattered." He closed the folder gently. "It matters, and so do you. But secrets, once unearthed, rarely stay quiet." Within days, Gerald Whitmore rode up to the ranch with 2 men and a sheriff. He dismounted with the confidence of someone who believed the law leaned naturally toward him. "Constance," he called, "we need to talk." She stepped onto the porch beside Garrett. Did not retreat, did not hide. "You lost that right," she said. Gerald smiled thinly. "You're confused. That's understandable given your limitations. But you're sitting on property that belongs to the Whitmore family." "No," Constance said calmly. "It belongs to my mother, and now to me." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Garrett spoke then. "You're trespassing." Gerald's smile widened. "We're serving notice, a challenge to the deed and to the marriage." James moved forward, fists clenched. Gerald glanced at him dismissively. And the boy, another concern, raised by a woman unfit to guide him. That was when Constance stepped fully into the light. "You will not speak about my family," she said, her voice steady and loud enough to carry. "Not here, not ever again," Gerald scoffed. "You're emotional. This is exactly the instability we warned about." "No," she replied. "This is clarity." She lifted her chin, scars fully visible, unhidden. "You taught me to disappear because it made you comfortable. You taught me silence because it made you powerful. That ends now." The men shifted. The sheriff cleared his throat. "This will go to court," Gerald said. "And when it does, they'll see you for what you are." Constance did not look away. "They already have," she said, "and I survived it." Gerald mounted his horse. "This isn't over." "No," Garrett said coldly. "Now it's begun." That night, the cabin felt smaller, not unsafe, but charged. "What if they win?" James asked quietly. "They won't," Constance said. "How do you know?" She placed the portfolio on the table. Her hands did not shake. "Because for the first time," she said, "I'm not hiding. And they can't fight what they can't control." Garrett watched her with something like pride. Outside, the wind picked up. Clouds gathered over the peaks. Storms were coming, not just from the sky. They watched. Happiness is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it attracts those who believe joy must be owned, controlled, or destroyed. And when the past returns, it never comes empty-handed. 1,000 words. The storm arrived before dawn, not the kind that announced itself with thunder, but the slow, grinding kind. Snow pushed sideways by wind, sky pressed low and heavy, the mountains closing in like witnesses. Garrett was already awake when the first rider appeared through the trees, then another. By the time Constance stepped onto the porch wrapped in her coat, 5 horses stood at the edge of the clearing. Gerald Whitmore dismounted first. Behind him, the sheriff, a railroad agent in a city coat unsuited for weather like this, and 2 hired men with the look of those paid not to ask questions. James moved to stand beside Constance without being told. Garrett came out last, rifle resting casually in the crook of his arm. "This is your last warning," Gerald called. "Hand over the documents, dissolve the marriage, and this ends quietly." Garrett did not raise his voice. "Get off my land." The railroad agent stepped forward, smiling thinly. "Mr. Blackwood, you're being unreasonable. That woman," he gestured at Constance without looking at her face, "is not capable of holding property. The court will agree." Constance felt James tense beside her. She placed a hand on his shoulder, then she walked forward. Every step felt deliberate, measured, The wind caught her hair, pulled her coat tight against her body. Her scars were fully visible. She did not shield them. "You keep saying what I am not capable of," she said. "Yet you rode up here because you're afraid of what I can do." The sheriff frowned. "Mrs. Blackwood, this isn't—" "It is," she interrupted. "It is exactly that." She reached into her coat and held up the portfolio. "My mother's land connects your failed route," she continued, eyes fixed on the railroad agent. "Water access. Stable grade. You wanted badly enough to drag my father out of his shame and use my body as an argument." The agent's smile faltered. Gerald snapped, "You're twisting things." "No," Constance said. "I'm finally naming them." She turned to the sheriff. "You know the deed is valid. You also know I am legally married and legally sane. This is intimidation." Silence stretched. The wind howled. Garrett did not move, but the rifle was no longer casual. James spoke then, voice breaking, but loud. "She's my mother, and if you try to take her or this place, you'll have to go through us." Gerald laughed, sharp and ugly. "You see, she's poisoned the boy." Garrett stepped forward at last, placing himself between Gerald and his family. "This ends now," he said. "You ride away or you leave in pieces. The law can follow if it wants. I'll still be standing." The railroad agent hesitated. He had not come for blood. The sheriff exhaled slowly. "This is a civil matter, not a siege." Gerald stared at Constance, eyes burning. "You could have stayed hidden. You chose to embarrass us." "I chose to live," she replied. "That's the difference." The sheriff removed his hat. "This won't be settled today." "No," Garrett said, "but it will be settled." One by one, the riders turned back. Gerald mounted last. "This isn't over," he said. Constance met his gaze steadily. "It never was." They rode away into the storm. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. James finally let out a breath he'd been holding. "I was scared," he admitted. "So was I," Constance said. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's refusing to let fear decide." Garrett took her hand, firm and grounding. "They came for you," he said, "and you stood." She nodded. "I'm done being their weakness." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, the air was steady. True strength is not found in the fist or the gun. It is found in the moment someone steps forward and says, "You will not decide my worth for me." Night settled over the mountains with a strange gentleness, as if the land itself were catching its breath after holding tension all day. Inside the cabin, the lamps were lit. Their soft glow pushed back the darkness, turning rough-hewn walls into something warm and familiar. The fire crackled steadily, no longer fighting the cold, only keeping company. Constance sat at the table, mending a tear in James's coat. Her hands moved with calm precision. Not long ago they would have trembled after a confrontation like that, after standing in full view of people who once held power over her. Tonight they were steady. James watched her quietly from the bench by the fire. "They looked at you differently today," he said. "Who?" she asked without looking up. "All of them, even Grand—" He stopped himself. "Even him." Constance tied off the thread and set the coat aside. "That's what happens when you stop asking permission to exist." Yet James nodded slowly, absorbing the idea like something fragile and valuable. "When I leave for school," he said after a moment, "I'll come back. I won't disappear." She met his eyes. "I know." Garrett stood near the window, watching snow begin to fall again, light, harmless flakes drifting down. Instead of the violent wind from earlier, he turned toward them. "They'll try again," he said, "not as a warning, as a fact." "Yes," Constance agreed. James frowned. "Doesn't it ever stop?" Garrett crossed the room and rested a hand on Constance's shoulder, solid and warm. "Sometimes the fight isn't about winning, it's about refusing to retreat." Constance leaned into that touch. Later, when James had gone to bed, the cabin grew quieter, the kind of quiet that invites thought rather than fear. Constance stood before the small mirror near her room. Firelight traced the familiar lines of her scars, the curve of her body, the woman she had spent years trying not to see. Garrett appeared behind her, not touching, simply present. "They'll use the court," she said softly. "Paper instead of threats. Words instead of horses. I know. They'll say I deceived you, that I trapped you, that I'm unfit." Garrett met her reflection's eyes. "And what will you say?" She thought for a long moment. "I'll say the truth," she answered, "that I was hidden, not broken, that I chose this life with open eyes, that loving me was never a mistake." He stepped closer then, resting his forehead against hers. "You didn't just survive," he said. "You changed the ground you stood on." She closed her eyes. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Snow fell softly on the roof, on the porch, on the land Gerald Whitmore believed he could still claim. The cabin held. Morning came with pale light and fresh snow. Constance stepped outside alone, breathing in the cold air. The mountains stood unchanged, immense, indifferent to human cruelty and pride. She realized then that even if the courts dragged on, even if more storms came, something irreversible had already happened. She no longer belonged to fear. Garrett joined her, wrapping a coat around her shoulders without comment. "This is your home," he said quietly, "if you'll have it." She turned to him, eyes bright with tears she did not try to hide. "I already do." They stood together as the sun rose, shadows retreating inch by inch. Somewhere beyond the mountains, men planned strategies and petitions and schemes. Here there was warmth, there was resolve, and there was a woman who had once been hidden, now standing openly in the light, scarred, strong, and unafraid to be seen. Tts. Home is not the place that shelters you from the storm. Home is the place that teaches you how to stand when the storm returns. Every story you listen to travels farther than you imagine. It crosses mountains, oceans, and years, connecting people who may never meet, but feel the same quiet ache for dignity, belonging, and love that refuses to be measured by appearances. If this story reached you tonight, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And if you still believe that even the most scarred hearts can find a place to rest, stay with me. The next story is already waiting for you.